Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Good morning, honorable members again. When the business of this House suspended, on the order of business, we were at the point of laying of documents by ministers. I wish to address briefly the incident that occurred at the end of the session. And I am in receipt of a correspondence addressed to the clerk of the House of Assembly dated the 5th of July by the honorable member for Cat Island Rumkey and San Salvador, and the leader of the opposition. I wish to note its contents with respect to the procedure on that occasion. I also wish to make it clear that the Parliament of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is a member of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. The Commonwealth Parliamentary Association has more than 100 members. In that association, it has been agreed by the various jurisdictions and parliaments that there are certain words and phrases that are forbidden as unparliamentary words and phrases. The 5 leading words that have been banned and restricted in those parliaments include blackguard, which we may not be too much familiar with, then that is a reference to slaves working in a kitchen. We may have a different term for that in this Western jurisdiction. The other words are lies, liar, rats, and swine. They are the 5 leading words that have been banned. On the occasion of the 30th of June, the honorable member for Angliston uttered the words scared rats, that the members are running like scared rats, and those words were audible to the ZNS broadcast. They were published all over the globe. They went out to the world. And it doesn't matter, in my estimation, whether you are on your feet or on your seat when it comes to the rules of procedure and the fact that in those rules, the broadcasts of the parliamentary proceeding are considered an official record of those proceedings. While on the member's feet, the member uttered the words, y'all telling lies. On numerous occasions that was uttered, and it is very audible on the broadcast tape. Those are 2 of the words that are banned by the parliaments throughout our jurisdiction and in our Commonwealth Association. Accordingly, this presiding officer will expunge from the record. And I'm expunging them from the record. The words, the words scared rat, scared rat, that is expunged from the record. And lies, you're telling lies, is expunged from the record. Further laying of documents by ministers. Honorable members, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumpi, and San Salvador.
That's trying to get an understanding of what just happened. I do not concede that the words mentioned were in fact mentioned by the member, but that's another matter. But
would you like for me to play the tape?
No. That's what I'm saying. I'm assuming, but not conceding that the words were said. So the tape need not be said. What I do know, the member was seated. The Hansard would only be recording what is being said by members who would have been recognized by yourself. And so what was put on the record, in fact, has been put on record by yourself, by regurgitating what...
Honorable member, I will give you the opportunity to respond, but I will not give you the opportunity to mislead and misrepresent what I said and what I've done.
So, well, I think that's where we may differ, if I may, because what my position is, Mr. Speaker, is that no record of those words should be on the record of the House, because it was said when the member was speaking. If said, seated, if said. You're taking the view that whether she was seated or not is still part of the record.
Honorable member, let me just clear that up while you are at that point. What my position was and is that if I am here sitting as the presiding officer and any words are shouted across the floor where my microphone, the speaker microphone is always on, and the speaker microphone can pick up those words, and those words are broadcast. They become a part of the record of the proceeding of Parliament. The broadcast of what happened what transpired on the 3rd of June, 2020, it is clear that those words that I mentioned were audible, and members of the public and us, they were all over the world.
Because that is the view expressed by the chair. What I'm saying, Mr. Chairman, that is not a view that we have to be adopted, because once a lot of things are said from the chair. You know, for example, while I'm speaking, many members shout a lot of things out, and nothing is said to them. I don't engage them, and it's not on the record. So that is what I'm saying. So and in any event, I had a conversation with the Prime Minister, Memphis Kalani, on the matters that transpired on that that moved a letter to be written by the Speaker on your direction, by the clerk on your direction, which he and I thought this would have been forgotten, right? And since you have raised it, you know, we are troubled as opposition members by the constant tension that exists between us. And for no reason, because only for the simple reason that you just don't listen. And all
Honorable member, honorable member, resume your seat.
Well, let me see. You don't want me to speak now?
Resume your seat. I gave you the opportunity to respond. You are making allegations now. Honorable member, resume your seat. Resume your seat.
You call us junk and you didn't say anything.
Honorable members,
You called us junk. Oh, and I said, let me call you junk then. Garbage. Let me call you
honorable member, resume your seat.
Let me call you garbage.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahamas.
I wish to raise a point of parliamentary privilege at this stage. The member for Angliston, from her seat, is shouting across the floor that this member from East Grand Bahama is junk. That is what she said. And this is on the back of what we spoke about earlier, where from her seat, she called this house liars. That is a fact on the record. Now, I'm not here to debate whether she should be censured or not. That's not my business. But what I do have a personal problem with is for her from her seat to call this member garbage, junk. Yes, it is what she said, Mr. Speaker. And it is. I ask for her apology and withdrawal of those words, or for her to be censured. You know, selective hearing.
Honorable members, honorable members, honorable members, we are moving on.
Speaker, I would like the I've been misrepresented. I never said that. No, what I said was, you called us junk. And I said, well, how would you feel? You said it's not unparliamentary. I said, okay, junk, garbage. Would you like me to call you garbage? That's what I said. That's what I said.
Honorable members,
You called us junk.
honorable members,
You called us junk. You called us junk.
the chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I believe that you would have spoken, Mr. Speaker, to how we ought to conduct and comport ourselves in this honorable place. Mr. Speaker, we are all considered to be honorable members. And Mr. Speaker, as the exemplars of this nation, Mr. Speaker, we all know that we can disagree. And many of us in this place, Mr. Speaker, are the quote unquote creme de la creme when it comes to, or we should be. And as a result of that, Mr. Speaker, we can find the kind of language to be able to describe our positions without leveling insults at each other. And so, Mr. Speaker, I do move that this House proceeds with its agenda at this point so that we can get on with the business of the Bahamian people who have called us to take care of their business.
Thank you, honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: Emergency Powers COVID-19 Pandemic Order 2020.
Order that the document be brought up.
Good question.
Order that the document will lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: Emergency Powers COVID-19 Pandemic Special Provision Order 2020.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document will lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas financial statements for the year ended 30 June 2017 and the detailed budget performance by line items for the year 30 June 2017.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
The laying of documents.
Statements and communications by ministers.
There are no statements and communications.
Communications by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and new writs. Presentation of petition. Presentations of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. Second reading and committal of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I take this opportunity to greet my constituents of East Grand Bahama, who I had the opportunity to visit with some of them this weekend. And I want to let them know that we are progressing with the cleanup in the area. Some of it is going faster than others, but I want to assure them that the commitment of the government is still with them as we look to providing the temporary shelter that some of them need, as well as to clean up the areas. Mr. Speaker, I want them to know.
Honorable member, are you debating as a compendium?
Yes, I'm going to get to that. Yes.
Thank you.
I want them to know that in this country of the Bahamas, there is no person, no individual who is junk. No individual, no person who is garbage. And it is regretful that in this honorable house, that those kinds of direct assertions could be made to the constituents or about the constituents of East Grand Bahama. Mr. Speaker, I did not raise.
Honorable member.
I did not call anybody.
The chair recognizes the member for Angleston on a point of order.
Yes, thank you. The member is again misleading this parliament. And I don't know why he feels he has to hold on to something to do that. What I said was, this member, and I said it from my seat, called us on this side junk. He said, but it's not unparliamentary. I said, well, I will use the word to junk. Suppose I called you garbage. That's what I said, which is similar to junk. And then he got up in such great outrage. His speech is on the record. And he wrote it and he read from it. And he called us junk. The junk crew on this side. The member should not misrepresent what happened in this house. Do not misrepresent. I'm not going to allow you to get away with that.
Honorable member.
To allow me to get away with anything. The House has rules. The House has rules. And so, Mr. Speaker, I will make a point later on with respect to this particular matter, because it is offensive. And we will deal with that as the rules permit us to deal with it. But as I said, there is no junk in this country. Every citizen of this country is valuable and has a valuable contribution to make. Mr. Speaker, today we are debating 3 pieces of legislation.
Honorable member, yes, you're shouting hypocrites. That is also a banned unparliamentary word. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama. Continue, honorable member.
Mr. Speaker, we really ought to be able to govern ourselves. I mean, it's like we're kindergartens in here. It's incredible. Mr. Speaker, we are today debating 3 related pieces of legislation that we will seek to debate as a compendium of bills. The Central Bank of the Bahamas Bill 2020, the Banks and Trust Company Regulations Bill 2020, and the Protection of Depositors Amendment Bill 2020. Mr. Speaker, these bills, among other things, addresses proposed reforms to enhance governance and the transparency in our monetary policy and fiscal responsibility framework, financial sector crisis management, and acceleration of the development of the domestic payment system. These bills, Mr. Speaker, are particularly important as they modernize the payment and settlement system, as well as provide relief and recourse for the central bank to act in the event that financial institutions find themselves in difficulty. Mr. Speaker, as background, most of these reforms encapsulate recommendations following the 2012 and 2019 IMF Financial Sector Assessment Program, or FSAP as we call it, the mission to the Bahamas, and the technical assistance which followed, particularly from the IMF and the World Bank. The proposals were also informed by benchmarking against best international practices and prevailing standards like the key attributes of effective resolution regimes for financial institutions that were adopted by the Financial Stability Board and endorsed by G20 leaders in 2011. Coming out of the 2008 financial crisis, the key attributes established enhanced standards for the resolution of troubled financial institutions. Globally, countries have taken steps to incorporate these standards into normal national legislation. Given that the failure of financial institutions could pose systemic risk to the stability of the financial system and lead to significant financial costs, the key attributes have as their core objective the ordinary resolution of financial institutions without severe systemic disruption and without exposing taxpayers to loss from solvency support. The emphasis is also on maintaining continuity of these vital economic functions. In particular, the attributes recommend that an effective resolution regime should have a legal framework that provides the resolution authority, first, with a broad range of powers and options to resolve early and quickly a bank that is no longer viable or is likely to become no longer viable before its balance sheet becomes insolvent. Feedback received following several rounds of industry and public consultations informed the reform proposals and these related bills. In 2015, the central bank coordinated meetings between the IMF and various public and private sector stakeholders, including the banking industry, the Ministry of Finance, the Judiciary, members of the Bahamas Institute of Chartered Accountants, and the Bar Association, to discuss the various approaches being considered for resolving problem banks. Following these meetings, the bank issued a discussion paper to gauge stakeholder early views on the preferred approach to bank resolution. Given the impact that a failed institution could have on financial stability, together with the need for swift intervention by the resolution authority to address systemic and other issues where an institution might be facing imminent failure, the central bank ultimately proposed an administrative approach to resolution. Public consultation on the reform proposals and the draft bills then followed with the publication of 2 consultation papers on the bank's website in June 2018 and October 2019. The administrative approach, while protecting the interests of depositors, preserves the rights of shareholders and creditors to seek legal redress if, following an adverse review by an independent valuer, they remain of the view that the resolution process causes them unreasonable losses. Considerable attention was also given to the importance of deposit insurance and the Deposit Insurance Corporation in the domestic financial stability framework. In this regard, the central bank availed itself of technical assistance from the Canadian Deposit Insurance Corporation to estimate the credible level of funding needed for the Deposit Insurance Corporation to devise strategies that will allow the fund to reach those levels over a medium to long-term horizon. In line with representations from the credit union sector, and following a consultative process with commercial banks, the central bank has also proposed to admit credit unions, which are also deposit-taking institutions, into the Deposit Insurance Corporation. It is a recognition that these operations are now also subject to the robust oversight of the central bank. Mr. Speaker, unrelated to the financial crisis management framework, there are also reforms laid out in the Central Bank of the Bahamas bill, which, among other things, seek to improve the governance arrangement between the government and the central bank. In keeping with its 2009-2013 strategic plan, the central bank undertook a comprehensive review of the current Central Bank of the Bahamas Act, with a view to reforming the legislation to ensure that the bank has a more modern and enabled framework, particularly for monetary policy, fiscal sustainability, governance, and its relationship with the government. Again, the bank was guided in its assessment with technical assistance from the IMF. The resulting proposals to the legislation reflects the IMF's recommendations, as well as important themes that are consistent with international best practices, benchmarked against provisions in key regional jurisdictions. They also enhance the policy credibility of a fixed exchange rate regime in which public borrowing from the monetary authority ought to be disciplined. Allow me at this point, Mr. Speaker, to highlight a few important proposals in the draft legislation. Starting with the Central Bank of the Bahamas bill. Speaking to the crisis management framework, the Central Bank of the Bahamas bill introduces several new provisions designed to complement and support the reform proposals to the financial crisis management framework, including establishing the central bank as the sole resolution authority for failing banks. The central bank would also be empowered to establish bridging entities to manage temporarily the assets of troubled entities in the midst of resolution. This is also important. There is also important emphasis on domestic payment system modernization. The central bank provides a framework for both the issuance and regulation of the Bahamian Central Bank digital currency. The SAM dollar, as the instrument has been called in the pilot phase underway, will provide an interoperable digital payment infrastructure. It will permit all supervised domestic institutions to provide digital financial services on a nationally integrated platform. In so doing, it will promote accelerated outcomes for inclusion and access to financial services, and would offer a platform for domestic fintech innovation. Mr. Speaker, this is a revolutionary, innovative development, as we know that many of our family islands, particularly those in the far south, do not have access to brick and mortar financial institutions. And so the introduction of this digital currency is going to provide significant opportunity for financial inclusion by those persons who may be so disadvantaged. And that is important for economic development, Mr. Speaker, because as we know, without the ability to transact business electronically, it provides an effective barrier to the opportunity for international business, to transact international business, as simple as booking a reservation at a resort or a small bed and breakfast in the family islands, and being able to transact business once there can be a limiting factor holding back the development potential of many of our family islands. So this is a good day and a good initiative that the central bank is putting forward, and certainly in line with our overall e-government initiative. Mr. Speaker, our overarching e-government initiatives are also advanced with this framework. With intensive work underway on the technology infrastructure and attention to key matters of regulations now in sharp focus, The central bank is preparing to make the sand dollar available on a national basis by the end of the third quarter of this year. The central bank bill further opens up participation in domestic payments and settlements to non-banks such as credit unions, money transfer businesses, that's the Western Unions and MoneyGrams and Sun Cash and those kind of businesses, and payment services firms. These will all be permitted to maintain settlement accounts at the central bank and be equipped to direct their own payments through the ACH and the real-time gross settlement system. I should add, Mr. Speaker, that there are provisions in the schedule to the bill to modernize the bank's governance framework by requiring a staggering of the tenure of members of the bank's board of directors over multiple years, increasing the number of existing directors from 4 to 6, and imposing explicit limits on the number of terms that the governor may be reappointed. Also, protocols outlined to recapitalize the bank in the event of any erosion of its capital. And this, Mr. Speaker, is important because the way that the old act was structured, directors would all come on the board at one time and leave at one time, and sometimes that leaves a learning gap as new directors may be appointed with no legacy knowledge of the actions of the bank over the last couple of years. And so this will, this staggered appointment will certainly lend to the efficiency of the management and governance of the bank. Likewise, Part 6 of the bill introduces more stringent provisions on short-term lending to the public sector, where no comprehensive balance sheet limits currently exist. Short-term advances and other forms of credit would be capped at 30% of the estimated revenues of the government and always subject to market interest rates. To be clear, this constrains the bank's capacity to lend to amounts that are significantly below the peak credit exposures of the midpoint of the last decade, while leaving just modest headroom for bridge financing in the current economic environment. By extension, it maintains the weight of the domestic debt management strategy on borrowing from non-central bank sources. The bill also articulates the governance framework for the management of the dormant accounts fund, mainly the inactive deposits placed under the bank's custody, how those funds are to be invested, and provisions for return of dormant funds subsequently claimed or transferred to the treasurer. The bill also seeks to consolidate the bank's administrative monetary penalty regime, empowering the central bank by regulation to designate certain contraventions of the Central Bank of the Bahamas bill or any act administered by the bank as violations and to impose fixed penalties in respect to such violations. This provides for an efficient, more transparent, and even-handed approach across all supervisory processes. Turning to the Banks and Trust Company Regulation Bill 2020, the Bank and Trust Companies Regulation Bill contains most of the substantive provisions for the resolution of troubled financial institutions that were discussed earlier in these remarks. One of these would be the requirements that the banks develop acceptable advance plans around how their operations would be wound up in the event of a failure or forced dissolution. This plan is to be reviewed annually and is the responsibility of the bank's senior management. For the expediency of financial stability and protection of depositors, the resolution of failed financial institutions would follow an administrative process, with the central bank empowered to prepare a resolution plan and to appoint a statutory administrator to oversee the recovery or liquidation of the entity if it is determined by the central bank that the entity has engaged in unsafe practices in such a manner that weakens the bank's condition threatens depositors' interest, or dissipates banks' assets, or contravenes the provisions of this act or central bank's directive. The statutory administrator is, if appointed, assumes all powers and responsibilities of the shareholders, directors, and officers of the bank, and the cost of an appointed administrator is borne by the bank under supervision. The statutory administrator shall act in accordance with the regulations pursuant to this act or directions of and is accountable to the Central Bank of the Bahamas to facilitate the purposes of this act. The specific requirements and duties of the statutory administrator are outlined in the bill and include to carry on the businesses of the bank, exercise shareholder rights and powers, continue or discontinue and or all of its operations, stop or limit the payment of the bank's obligations, remove any and all directors and officers, employ any necessary staff or employee, execute any instrument in the name of the bank, initiate or defend the conduct of the bank, sell, merge, or dispose of a subsidiary of the bank, or indeed the bank itself, preserve and safeguard the assets of the bank, or implement a plan of action with respect to the bank that has been approved by the Central Bank of the Bahamas. The bill makes provision for the termination of the statutory administrator under prescribed circumstances. Section 28(4) of the Central Bank Bill gives the bank authority to incorporate a bridge institution for the purpose of, among other things, receiving a transfer and effecting a timely disposal of the assets, rights, and liabilities of a bank under statutory administration. And a bridge institution is defined in the Act. Section 49 empowers the bank to grant this entity a license to carry on the business of a bridge institution as defined in the bill, and grant exemptions or grant approval for the purposes necessary to facilitate the carrying on of its licensed business. This entity may be designated a bridge institution for a period of 2 years. The Minister of Finance may extend this designation to up to 3 years in 12-month increments. Under this provision, the Central Bank of the Bahamas may hold shares in a bank through a bridging institution for up to 5 years, extended by the Minister only if market conditions warrant. That is, Mr. Speaker, that if the statutory administrator determines to transfer the assets of a troubled bank into a bridging institution, that bridging institution may hold those assets for a maximum of 5 years before disposing of those assets, unless market conditions are such that disposing of those assets at that time may not be the most practical and efficient thing to do, and in which case the minister can extend that period. The bill gives the statutory administrator the power to transfer assets, rights, and liabilities to an asset management vehicle and describes the conditions upon which such transfers can occur and the responsibility of the bank to report to the minister on such activity. The bill provides for the appointment of liquidators in the winding up of a bank, which may not be done voluntarily without the permission of the central bank. It should be noted that in a liquidation of a bank, the priorities of claims are as follows: administrator and liquidation expenses first, subrogated claims of the Deposit Insurance Corporation under the protection of the Depositors Act in respect to insured deposits, deposits that are uninsured, credits extended to the bank by the Central Bank of the Bahamas until the appointment of the liquidator, wages and salaries, taxes to the government, fees and assessments due to the Central Bank of the Bahamas, credits extended to the bank after the appointment of liquidators, all unsecured creditors, and then subordinated debts in that order. Finally, the bill makes provision for the adjusted fee schedule of bank and trust companies, which was enacted last year in respect to the removal of preferential licensing regime for financial institutions. The final bill being a part of this compendium of bills today is the Protection of Depositors Amendment Bill 2020. Mr. Speaker, the Protection of Depositors Act establishes the Deposit Insurance Corporation, whose objectives are to provide insurance against the loss of part or all of deposits in financial institutions and promote and otherwise contribute to the stability of the financial system in the Bahamas. Deposit insurance coverage is limited to $50,000 or such greater or lesser amount as the minister may by order prescribe on the advice of the central bank after consultation with member institutions, and shall be paid by the corporation in respect of every depositor, notwithstanding the number of accounts held by the depositor in the same capacity in the institution. Provided that a depositor shall be entitled to a separate insured deposit for each account held in different capacities and rights with the same member institution, and for each account held to different member institutions. The Protection of Depositors Amendment Bill highlights deposit insurance elements as the third pillar in the resolution framework in relation to general principles which I outlined above. It also advances other reforms to strengthen the deposit insurance scheme. In particular, crisis management provisions preserve the Deposit Insurance Corporation's coverage and rights during any resolution process that would involve a change of ownership or transfer of a member's institution's assets. Clause 5 of the bill seeks to repeal Section 4 of the Principal Act to provide the criteria upon which membership in the fund is based and makes membership for cooperative credit unions compulsory. And that is new, Mr. Speaker. And that is particularly important. And I know that the credit union movement had some reservation about them being subject to the central bank regulations and the stringent requirements as a financial institution. But I know that they are also equally eager for their depositors to be covered under this Deposit Insurance Corporation program, as it gives credibility to their operations and protection to their depositors. And so this benefit is now being extended to credit unions, but along with it comes the stringent requirements as a financial institution under the central bank regime. Again, these developments provide credibility to the institutions and safety and security to the depositors, which is paramount. To optimize flexibility around adequacy of funding for the scheme, the Deposit Insurance Corporation would be authorized to vary the premium rate for coverage based on prescribed criteria, including a member financial institution's risk profile, and to borrow from the government to satisfy claims obligations. The corporation would have enhanced powers to expand the types of instruments in which it invests, subject to the approval of the corporation's board, and to increase the first year's premium payable by new members of the fund from 1/20th of 1% to 1/10th of 1% of insured deposits. Section 6 of the Principal Act is amended to reduce over a prescribed period the time within which the corporation must make payouts to depositors, from 20 days down to 7 days after an event. With regard to the safety and soundness of member institutions, the corporation would also be empowered to delegate rights to the central bank to undertake supervisory examinations, specifically on the former's behalf. Mr. Speaker, these reforms collectively support strengthening of both the domestic and international sectors of the financial sector. They particularly serve to keep our banking sector supervisory standards in sync with international best practices, and they strengthen the regulatory transparency and certainty of the business environment for our financial institutions. From the perspective of users of our financial services, the enhanced crisis management framework also promotes increased confidence in the system and strengthens financial stability prospects. In addition, through these reforms, we are signaling our resolve to bring credit unions up to the same standard of deposit protection that is provided to domestic banks. Again, keeping step with the enhanced supervisory regime with which they are now afforded. And again, this is particularly important as the credit union movement continues to grow and gain respect as credible financial institutions. And of course, we know credit unions empower average Bahamians. So this is particularly important and an exciting development. We are promoting the deepening of the domestic financial sector with a focus on payment systems modernization and improved outcomes for financial inclusion and financial access. The domestic space is being opened up to new providers of digital services, and we are enabling an infrastructure that will facilitate fintech innovation. Finally, we are making the institutions of domestic monetary and financial sector policy more transparent with enhanced government arrangements. And this is a credibility enhancing signal for both domestic and international stakeholders. And Mr. Speaker, as I take my seat, I do want to recognize a statement from, or at least from our neighbor, the United States, in respect to transparency in financial reporting matters, government finance reporting, that lists the banks amongst countries that are not transparent. And I take issue with the assessment because it is based upon solely upon the rate or the pace at which the Auditor General's Department presents its audited financial statements to this Parliament. And I would have laid today the 2017 report. Mr. Speaker, we all know the challenges of the Auditor General's Department in terms of resources. And we also know the scope and extent of the government being, if you were to take it as an organization, the largest organization operating in this country. It does take some time for the Auditor General's Department, with all of its responsibilities for current audit, to complete the audit process. And I think it is highly unfair for an assessment and a statement to have been made in the way that it's been said, even though the report does state the basis on which they make that statement. As we all know, most of us do not bother to read the details. So we see the headline and we say the government is not transparent. And that is absolutely not the facts. The assessors themselves make that point clear in the details of their report. And it is strictly about the frequency and timeliness of those audit reports being presented to Parliament. And I just wanted to make that point because I know that there's a lot of mischief makers, and I wanted to put it on the record because again, it is, in my humble view, misleading and unfortunate the way that it has been presented. This government has been one of the most transparent governments with respect to its fiscal affairs. We introduce quarterly financial reporting, which gives an update of the government operations over the last quarter and over the past period of the fiscal year. We established a website where citizens can go online and see for themselves the budget as well as these fiscal reports, so they can chart for themselves and measure for themselves how the government is performing in respect to its budget. These are unprecedented tools that are being made available to the general citizen. We have just come off the 2020-2021 budget, where we made a deliberate effort to be available and to make public presentations as to the state of the government's finances and the economic developments as we see them. And I want to just encourage again the Bahamian public to take advantage of these tools as they provide valuable input, not only as to where we are and where we see ourselves going in this economic environment. It also gives clues as to those areas where Bahamians may want to invest. Because as we all talk about the diversification of this economy and the deepening of economic prosperity, there's no good for the government to talk. There's no good for the government to provide the initiatives and the concessions if Bahamians are unaware or they fail to take advantage of those concessions and those incentives. And so I want to, again, just encourage Bahamians to not buy into the fear, not to buy into the unfortunate rhetoric that we see pervading the airways and the WhatsApps and the social medias and all the rest of it, but to look for what is good and what is tangible in these budgets and in this economic environment. As we said in the budget, creating opportunity from crisis. And we've seen Bahamians who have taken advantage of those opportunities and are making headway as they refine their products from crude products in the initial stage to more refined products. And that is how we're going to be able to compete and how we're going to be able to turn this economy around into one that is not only consuming, but the one that is producing. And so again, I want to encourage Bahamians to take advantage of every opportunity in this country. And no one is barred, no matter of their political affiliation, their family affiliation. Take advantage of everything that is available in this country, every opportunity that is available in this country, including the highest job in this land, that of the Prime Minister, that in your private professional field. You have that right as a Bahamian anywhere in this country. Not because you come from Grand Bahama means that you must be limited to Grand Bahama. You are Bahamian, and you have a right to take jobs anywhere in this country. And so, Mr. Speaker, with that, I rest, and I recommend to this Parliament the adoption of this compendium of bills, the Central Bank of the Bahamas Bill 2020, Bank and Trust Companies Regulation Bill 2020, and the Protection of Deposit Amendment Bill 2020.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Is there a seconder?
Central Bank of the Bahamas Bill.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Yamakoro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Let me say it's a delight to stand, a delight and a privilege to stand in this honorable place and second these compendium of bills that are being laid and we are now debating. Mr. Speaker, this is the way how it should be done. In terms of this is the quintessential expression of bringing bills to the House, the Honorable House, to have them debated, where there's been full and frank public consultation. Not only has there been full and frank public consultation. These bills, as a direct contribution. Hello? Oh. These bills, Mr. Speaker, are as a direct contribution of one of the country's leading players in industry, leading the way to bring conventional and timely legislation to this honorable House. And Mr. Speaker, when I speak to consultation, as the member for Eastern End so eloquently put it, I'm talking about the judiciary, the Bahamas Bar Association, industry, and I know I don't say this, I will not be chastised for this, but the opposition, everybody within the Commonwealth of the Bahamas had a full opportunity to consult on these bills. But these bills should have been debated some time back, but for COVID-19, Mr. Speaker, these bills are now being debated. They were up on the central bank website, Mr. Speaker, and so we're here now today to debate these bills. Mr. Speaker, the central bank has prepared these drafts. With the assistance of the Office of the Attorney General and the endorsement of the Ministry of Finance, and following several rounds of industry and public consultation, most of these proposals encapsulate recommendations following the 2012-2019 IMF Financial Sector Assessment Mission to the Bahamas, and embarking and benchmarking against best international practice. Mr. Speaker, these reforms are proposed for enactment at this juncture to support some of the current priorities in digital transformation of the public sector and the economy, and to bolster financial stability risk framework. In particular, Mr. Speaker, this collaboration between the central bank, the government, and industry advocates swift deposit insurance access as to boost the confidence for those less capitalized trade unions. Mr. Speaker, we're debating three bills this morning, and that is the lead bill, the Central Bank of the Bahamas Bill 2020, the Bank and Trust Companies Regulations Bill 2020, and the Protection of Depositors Bill 2020. Mr. Speaker, if you look at these bills, there are any number, they can encapsulate more than 200 sections. So I intend to give a brief overview of the bill. As I said earlier, the member for East End did an excellent job. I intend to give a brief overview of the bill and then highlight some of the more, well, all of the sections are important, but highlight some of the sections for this honorable House. Mr. Speaker, the Central Bank of the Bahamas Bill proposes the modernization of the bank governance framework with key provisions to stagger bank of directors' tenure over multiple years and to increase the number of external directors from 4 to 6. Also, protocols outline to recapitalize the institution in the event of an erosion of capital, and explicit limits are placed on the number of terms that the governor may be reappointed. And Speaker, I'm happy to see legislation being put in place where it highlights the number of times that an individual can be in office. Under the financial sector crisis to reform standards, the bank would also be empowered to establish bridging entities to manage temporarily the assets of troubled supervised entities in the midst of resolution processes. Other new provisions would extend the payment system modernization initiative, introducing a framework for insurance and regulation of a Bahamian central bank digital currency. Open up participation in payment settlement process to non-banks through settlement accounts maintained at the central bank. The bill also articulates a governance framework for the management of the dormant account fund, mainly the inactive deposits placed under the bank's custody. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the Bank and Trust Companies Regulations Bill. The Bank and Trust Companies Regulation Bill contains added substantive provisions for the resolution of troubled financial institutions. One of these would be the requirement that banks develop advanced plans around how their operation would be wound up in the event of failure or forced resolution. For the expedience of financial stability and protection of depositors, resolutions of failed financial institutions would follow an administrative process with the central bank empowered to appoint a statutory administrator to oversee the recovery of liquidation of the entity. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the Protection of Depositors Amendment Bill. The Protection of Depositors Amendment Bill, among noteworthy provisions, would complete the resolution framework and promote other reforms to strengthen the deposit insurance scheme. In particular, crisis management provisions preserve deposit insurance corporation coverage and rights during any resolution process that would involve a change of ownership or transfer of member institutions' assets. Beyond this focus, membership in the DIC would be expanded to include credit unions, also to optimize flexibility around adequacy of funding for the scheme. The DIC would be authorized to vary the premium rate for coverage and to borrow from the government to satisfy claim obligations. With regard to satisfy soundness of member institutions, the corporation would also be empowered to delegate rights to the central bank to undertake supervisory examination, specifically on the former's behalf. Mr. Speaker, I now will take the Honorable House into some of the more not critical provisions, but some of the provisions as outlined in the Central Bank of the Bahamas Bill 2020. Mr. Speaker, it's always very important to remember what is the purpose of the bill. And the purpose of the bill, Mr. Speaker, the purposes are to consolidate and modernize the law governing the bank, and to provide for the continuance of the bank, its functions, powers, and duties. The bill is comprised of 12 parts and 66 clauses. Mr. Speaker, Clause 8 of the bill mandates that the currency of the Bahamas are notes, coins, and electric money issued by the bank, with the unit of currency being the Bahamian dollar. And it's excellent, Mr. Speaker, as we look to cryptocurrency. This is the new sand dollar that we have integrated into this bill, that the currency of the Bahamas includes electronic money. Section 10 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, empowers the bank as the sole authority with the right to issue notes and coins in the Bahamas. So, Mr. Speaker, I know sometimes some persons with some high resolution photocopying machines may be tempted, but this bank identifies that the sole authority or entity who's responsible for issuing bank notes in the Bahamas is the Central Bank of the Bahamas. Clause 13 of the bill provides that no person is entitled as of right to recover from the bank the value of any note stolen, manipulated, or imperfected note or coin by the bank. And Mr. Speaker, the bank exercised the discretion as to whether or not it would reimburse for in those circumstances. Section 15 of the bill empowers the bank to make regulations for the purpose of prescribing the framework under which electronic money may be held or used in the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, I would invite members of the public to go to the central bank website, pull down these bills. They provide for it's easy reading. Sometimes some bills are somewhat complex, but it provides for proper discussion. And then for some members of parliament, if you want to have a town meeting to explain some of these bills, it's an excellent opportunity to advise your constituents being in public. And I want to thank the Ministry of Finance for doing just that on the way that we're heading. And while I'm there, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to commend the member for East End for coming to Yamakro. I'll highlight some of that when I'm finished, and giving a talk on the budget that we just passed. And he did that days before the budget. And so on behalf of the community, I extend profound gratitude to you, sir. Section 24 of the bill vests the bank with broad powers to impose by order a fine on a financial institution that the bank believes to have committed specified offenses under this act. And so this bill empowers the central bank to supervise the activities of all banks, trust companies, and lending institutions within the Commonwealth of the Bahamas to ensure that they treat fairly with their clients. Section 28 of the bill makes provisions for the bank's ancillary powers to conduct business incidental or consequential upon discharge of its functions. So all those provisions there deal with the bank's power to supervise other institutions. One of the more I'd like to draw your attention now to Clause 34 of the bill. Clause 34 mandates the bank to prepare in accordance with the Act and the International Financial Reporting Standards the statement of accounts of the bank to reflect its operation and financial condition. So it brings that provision require the bank to conduct its affairs in a way that would bring transparency and clarity to the business of the bank. Section 35 of the bank provides for the bank to transmit to the minister the account and report of the operations of the bank within 4 months after the end of the financial year. Section 37 of the bill provides for the establishment of an audit committee to audit the affairs and the accounts of the bank. And one of the things I like about this bill is that it preserves an age-old constitutional requirement, and that is protection of the legal professional privilege. I'll take you to section 38.8. I think it's very fundamental, and as we conduct the affairs of the Bahamas, that we remember that requirement to protect the fundamental right of the individual legal professional privilege, and to defend oneself. The person, and I read it, a person is not required under this section to disclose information or to produce a document which the person would be entitled to refuse to disclose or produce on the grounds of legal professional privilege in court proceedings. And so I deliberately highlighted that one because I think it is most important as we have wide-ranging discussions in the community about the right of individuals to access the court and to be treated fairly. Section 45 of the bill provides that where any offense under this act has been committed by a body corporate and is proved to have been committed, with the consent or connivance of, or to be attributed to by the neglect on the part of a director, manager, secretary, or any similar officer, it would cause that individual or those individuals to be liable to sanction under this act. The act also speaks to the need for confidentiality. Section 43 of the bill provides for the confidentiality of information and prohibits any person who is or has been a director, officer, employee, or agent, or advisor of the bank from disclosing said information. So, Mr. Speaker, as I indicated, I'll go to two more clauses that I think need be addressed. Pre-adventure 3 is code of conduct for the bank and the way they should conduct their affairs. The right to appeal to the Supreme Court if anybody is dissatisfied by a decision given to the bank. And the issue of conflict of interest, that there should not be anybody working with the bank or financial institution should not allow their private affairs to conflate their obligation to their institution. So, Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the Protection of Depositors Amendment Bill. It's a very short bill, Mr. Speaker, 28 sections in the schedule. Mr. Speaker, I now take you to the purpose of the bill. And the purpose of the bill is to enhance the corporate governance framework of deposit insurance. And I want to commend the member for East End for his contribution on this bill. To enhance depositors' protection, to reduce the time within which the corporation makes payouts to depositors following a failure of a member institution, and D, to include cooperative credit unions in the membership of the Deposit Insurance Fund. Mr. Speaker, I'm a member of the Teachers and Salaries Credit Union and a member of an institution that I revere, love, and respect, the Police Credit Union. And I know that there were some concerns expressed on when these issues were first raised, but I'm delighted to hear of the benefits that it brings to lending institutions, such as the Police Credit Union and other credit unions that provide a most needed service to many Bahamians within the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And so, Mr. Speaker, I would just highlight a few of the sections in this bill. This bill repeals Section 9 of the bill, repeals and replaces Section 8 of the Principal Act to make provision for a board of directors of the corporation. Section 10, I would invite persons to go online, pull down the main bill, and read both of them to get an appreciation of the amendment. Clause 10 of the bill repeals and replaces Section 9 of the Principal Act to make provisions for directors of the corporation to disclose conflict of interest. Now I'll take you to Section 18 of the bill, which repeals Section 19 of the Act and provides for an annual audit, and that's critically important. Section 3 of the bill, 23 of the bill, repeals and replaces Section 25 of the Principal Act and makes provision for the protection inter alia of the staff and directors of the corporation from legal liability for good faith actions when they conduct their affairs pursuant to the Act or this bill that will soon be made law. Section 27 imposes a duty of confidentiality on those who conduct business pursuant to the Protection of Depositors and Amendment Bill. Speakers, as the member for East End has said, and this collaboration between the central bank and entities within the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is all designed to bring transparency. It undergirds our regulatory responsibility both locally and internationally, because it authorizes the central bank to make disclosure to international regulatory agencies, and national regulatory agencies, for the specific purpose of preventing issues such as money laundering, revenue that may be derived from trafficking in humans or trafficking in drugs to as best it can for its regulatory responsibility to encourage or say to the international community that the Bahamas is a pristine jurisdiction, fully committed to proper regulation where financial crime is not encouraged and or condoned. So there go the compendium of bills, Mr. Speaker. I'd also like to touch briefly on the Bank and Trust Companies Regulation Bill 2020. Mr. Speaker, I'll just speak to what the bill seeks to do. Seeks to repeal the Bank and Trust Companies Regulation, consolidate and modernize the laws regulating banks and trust companies, provide for special resolution framework for the bank. And so, Mr. Speaker, in a whole, these, as I said earlier, the bills are designed to, in a digital framework, Mr. Speaker, to enhance not a notion, but what we've been talking about for a long time now, the ease of doing business. How do we digitize the financial institutions in the Bahamas? And you do it in a smart way, not just to digitize them, Mr. Speaker, but you do it in a way where there is proper regulation. So the world would know that, as I said before, that the Bahamas is a place that does not condone financial crime. And so I take this opportunity to commend the central bank, to commend all of the social partners who are involved in this process, to commend the central bank and the government of Bahamas for putting the legislation out there and inviting persons to be a part of the process of consultation. Mr. Speaker, those are my submissions on the three bills, and I support the bills that were laid. Mr. Speaker, I just crave your indulgence just to highlight a few issues as they relate to the Amacroft constituency. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, I would like to thank, we're continuing with public consultation regime in the Amacroft constituency, and you saw us earlier going into the community and highlighting issues that are germane to the community. We looked at the whole development in terms of derelict buildings, derelict vehicles, as we're moving on. We highlighted the whole Stoke House situation. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that we've tried our endeavor best to be amicable in the process, to reach out to the family, to see how best we can resolve this issue that many in the community have said directly to me presents a difficulty to them. Mr. Speaker, we have established the hurricane emergency response team in keeping with NEMA. NEMA's objective to always be ready, and we sent out a notice in the community. And I was delighted. We got donations of chainsaws, and we highlighted trees. And now, Mr. Speaker, members of the community are sending notices to us as to where they want us to come and extricate trees that are a danger to their homes. And so we went in this weekend. We had a fun time as we took down 2 large trees in the Twynham area. And on this weekend, we will be in Star State. We're being somewhat overwhelmed, but I'm happy to say that the community, they're coming together, and there's something, they always say when I talk about Cat Island. But let me tell you how we did it. We always had to clear the road to go to the north side. And so you arrange for a weekend. When all the men, the children, and the women would cook, and you would clear the road. And so we took that same philosophy of a family in the Amacroft constituency. So if you pass by, there will be proper social distancing. They're going to provide us with the food, and we're going to go in, and then we're going to be taking out those trees every weekend. And I want to commend the community for coming together with that. We're starting our virtual classes. We got $25,000 donated for our band equipment. And we've deliberately named the band the Eastern Community Rising Star Band. So I see my neighbor in Dr. San. It's the Eastern Community Rising Star Band. St. Anne's, it is the Eastern Community Rising Star Band. And if Foxville wants to send a few, but just know that Yamakro can be first. And so we're starting our virtual classes, English and math. Mr. Speaker, I don't have I do have a bias, and I must say that. I think we need to reach out to our men. I've been finding that too many men that I meet in the community, especially the young men, have not. It's very promising, but they need that help and they need that guidance. And so we're starting our virtual classes with English and math. And I told them, if you get the math and you get the English, you work on a foreign language, you get into the College of the Bahamas, and it would improve their opportunities. So we're going to start that, Mr. Speaker. And we're continuing, Mr. Speaker, with the general upkeep of the community. We've met with, I want to thank Mr. Bannister, the Minister for Work. We've met with his team, and we've done an entire constituency-wide assessment for infrastructural needs. I want to thank you for the lights that have started to come through and repair the roads, and a number of other things, the drainage. And I want to thank his team for being so responsive. I want to thank especially, Mr. Speaker, the member for Long Island. And we were really on him when one of the generators were out the other day. And there was a problem with water and sewage. And I mean, those men, they came in on the weekend. They met with the families. There's one gentleman, Mr. Higgs, who lives in Elizabeth Estate. And Mr. Higgs was on me. And he even commended and complimented you and the Water and Sewage Corporation for the work that you did, Long Island, because he was able to assess it. And he says, Mr. Johnson, they totally refurbished the pump. And so he keeps me up to date on what's happening in that area. So I want to thank you. I want to thank my team. Speakers being rough, but like my mother said, no excuses. We don't back down and we don't quit. We're here to serve. And so for those, Mommy, I'm coming to see you in Cat Island. And I want to as I see Angliston, I want to reach out to someone who is a long ways away, who always sends me a private message. Mr. Arthur Dion Hanna Jr. I know he's watching. He's fiery. He's a firebrand and a self-starter. That's right. I'm going to take her on my. And so, Mr. Arthur Dion Hanna Jr., your student says hello. And we're looking forward to having you back very soon, even though I know your spirit is here with us in the Bahamas. Those are my sentiments here today, and I trust that they find favor, most certainly, with the people of the Bahamas and this honorable house. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a second time and committed. A bill for an act to repeal the Central Bank of the Bahamas Act, Chapter 351, to consolidate and modernize the law governing the Central Bank of the Bahamas and for connected matters. As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for the Exumas on Ragged Island.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm always grateful to speak on behalf of the people of Exumas on Ragged Island. And today my heart go out to two freedom fighters, their families, freedom fighters and community builders in the island of Exuma. The family of Mr. Julian McKenzie and Baratari, who passed, and the family of Ms. Molly Kemp in Williamstown. May their souls rest in peace. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the hardworking and resilient people of the Exumas on Ragged Island to contribute to this compendium of bills to modernize the Central Bank of the Bahamas and its regulatory regime. We in the opposition understand that these bills have the general support of the industry. They've been in circulation for a while and have the support of the governor of the central bank and his team. We commend the governor for being progressive, for his innovation, and for his diligence. Mr. Speaker, we have no objection to the passage of these bills, and we will support them. I would point out, though, that these bills were only recently laid here in the House, notwithstanding that they may have been in circulation for a while, as a helpful suggestion for the future when we have bills so significant that it impacts the Central Bank of the Bahamas, one of the fundamental institutions of the Bahamas. It would be useful for perhaps more engagement, even consultation with the opposition. I would go as far as saying there might even be a red line version of these bills that might be presented given the import. They are being very substantive in terms of their changes. We're repealing the Central Bank Act and replacing it. These are significant. It's of great volume and it's of great importance. So, Carmichael, a red line version to the opposition caucus might be useful for future when we have legislation of such extent. Mr. Speaker, this would be helpful also in allowing us to advise the public on some of these changes and help to assist the government in alleviating or avoiding some confusion with respect to interpretation of these bills, such as was ensued after the passage of the Dormant Accounts Bill. Generally, these bills appear to better position the central bank for effective management of the industry and for its own affairs. With respect to the Protection of Depositors Amendment Bill 2020, this bill extends deposit insurance to credit unions for the first 50,000 deposits. Under Section 5 of this bill, the inclusion of credit union is a welcome addition. This is something that has been called for quite some time by the industry, by the public, and this will no doubt be celebrated by members of the various credit unions. Credit unions are homegrown institutions that deserve to have a level playing field in order to compete in the Bahamas. And in my view, more should be done, even more, to foster the growth of local banking and financial institutions. We often roll out the red carpet for the big banks, allowing them to amass handsome profits. And then we wring our hands when they move their headquarters elsewhere, when they increase fees astronomically, and when they hold back on lending domestically. If credit unions are given a fair chance to compete, and this would put them in a better position, we could capture more of the wealth in this sector domestically. This will certainly create more credibility for the credit union business. So we can get behind this and we will support this bill. We support any effort that builds confidence in our local financial institutions, Mr. Speaker, and this bill will ensure against loss of deposits and will contribute to the stability generally of the financial system. This is a positive move. There is a question, however, with respect to the selection of the board of the Deposit Insurance Corporation, and we note that the appointments are made substantially by the minister. Unlike the central bank, we believe there can and should be more independence. A more robust process of independence might be achieved by receiving recommendations for appointment from the Chamber of Commerce, Small Business Association, and professional bodies like BICA and the Bar Association, rather than having the minister unilaterally appoint these directors, which is in fact the majority of the overall board. In principle, though, we support the bill. This point can also be made with respect to the Central Bank of the Bahamas. With regard to the Bank and Trust Regulations Bill 2020, we support this bill as well, but we have a few concerns. This bill seemed to design to give more teeth to the regulatory regime to deal with the supervision of troubled banks. When we look, though, at the asset management vehicle as defined on page 5, we wonder why the government would wish or need to own shares in a company established for the purpose of receiving an asset of a bank that is under statutory administration. The government might theoretically hold 100% of the shares in that company. Many bankers might find this offensive. It might cause for some concern by bank owners, and it might cause some concern as whether a rogue administration might compulsorily acquire. And I know this isn't what is intended, given the endorsement of this section by the governor of the central bank, but I think we should take care.
Honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I don't want to interrupt, but I think it's important at this stage just to ensure that we do not give an impression that the government is motivating the actions of the central bank in respect to designating or establishing a institution to take control of a troubled bank. That is the sole remit of the Central Bank of the Bahamas. The government does not dictate that. As the institution or the entity that the central bank may incorporate is concerned, obviously the central bank would be the sole shareholder of that institution, but is only for the purposes of managing those assets until they can be disposed of, as I indicated in my contribution. So I just want to make sure that we don't create, not intentionally, any fear amongst our financial services institutions that the government has the ability to unilaterally take control of anybody's assets. And I think that's just important that we make sure that's clear.
Thank you, honorable member.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for the intervention by the minister, and perhaps we will deal with this under the head, but on page 5 on the interpretation 2C, in reflection on the asset management vehicle, it says this vehicle might be wholly or partially owned by the bank and or the government. And my only question is why the government would wish to insert itself here. And I believe they can have the desired impact by removing the word "and the government" and allow the central bank to proceed unimpeded. The main elements of this bill appears to be in part 6, the special resolution framework for banks. This appears to me to be comprehensively lays out options and processes for detailing what happens in the event of a challenged bank in terms of a resolution vehicle. And it seems to, quite frankly, be an endorsement of the resolve model. The resolve model, you might recall, is a vehicle that the current administration marched against when they were in opposition. Not sure whether they remember that one. But you marched against it when you were in opposition, and when you were in government, you shifted more into it than the last administration. And that's why I find it laughable sometimes when they talk about flip-flopping, Mr. Speaker. But the regulations on liquidation and administration are included, and it appears rather comprehensive. All things being equal, these will actually strengthen the administration process and augur well for certainty and stability of the financial system. Again, this seems to address many of the matters experienced by that well-known challenged bank in the past. But we'll have to monitor and see the effectiveness of these regulations. Turning to the Central Bank of the Bahamas Bill 2020, this bill seeks to modernize and consolidate laws governing the central bank, and of course, we support this bill as well. When we look at Section 5 in this section, resolution authority means the authority which is responsible for the resolution of banks, including carrying out resolution planning functions. This in particular is positive in that it empowers the central bank to help to solve banking challenging issues and to do so on a timely basis. Again, that well-known challenged bank comes to mind. And much of it is now historic, but it's good to see that these provisions are being brought into place in the event such circumstances reoccur. I say to this extent, it would have potentially solved some of those issues of the past in that particular bank had we had them into the regulatory environment and had the central bank had access to those tools. Looking at Section 9, the inclusion of electronic money as currency is a positive outcome. This is further supported by Section 12, denoting it as legal currency. And further, when we look at Section 15, hopefully this will be used in such a way to expand the space for money transfer services providers. And in the interest of full transparency, I have an interest in one such company. It will help also to facilitate the development of more fintech. Mr. Speaker, digitization is something that we support wholeheartedly and we can get behind. There are the settlement of accounts for MTSPs at the central bank as a clearinghouse, and this is also a positive. Looking at Section 21 of the bill, we do ask if there should be even more urgent move to list government securities on the stock exchange. This has been something that's been talked about tonight for a long, long time. And I'm glad that the governor of the central bank seems to be moving in this direction. Mr. Speaker, I mentioned earlier, these are progressive pieces of legislation. Mr. Speaker, this bill also talks about appointing 6 directors who appear to the Governor General to possess wide experience, etc. Again, this is a curious wording, but we know the import of this is that the government and the minister will appoint 6 directors to the board. And I made the point earlier of finding a more robust, independent framework for doing this, perhaps getting recommendations from some of the professional bodies to ensure that the central bank always be held out as a beacon of independence in our country in every respect. Mr. Speaker, in general, I have made this point many times before. It bears repeating. Banking is far too difficult in this country. And that is for many reasons. But for the most part, the big banks want to do business in the Bahamas without adapting to the culture and archipelagic nature of this country. We have seen mass and heartless departures from some of the family islands. Therefore, many people in our country have been left unbanked. We see processes performed more easily in Toronto, in some of the head offices of these locally represented banks, Canadian banks represented here. processes in their Canadian institutions performed more easily and more efficiently than is being done here in the Bahamas. Many of the people in our country, including in Long Island, are being left unbanked, and many of the other family islands shared a similar complaint. We maintain that easy access to banking, financial services, is essential for the economic empowerment of our people. It's essential for the growth of small business. It's essential for the development of medium-sized and larger businesses who possess branches in these islands. And it's ultimately essential for national development. There is also a problem with our regulatory regime in that we seem to impose many rigid conditions, sometimes more than what may be required by law. Onerous KYC limiting services, charging for every little thing with what might appear to be sometimes excessive charges, even for account holders. And because of the number of those unbanked, we support the use of even more electronic means of payment, inclusive of the new digital currency and the sand dollar. As you well know, the Progressive Liberal Party is a strong proponent of digitization, and we have to run towards it even more quickly. COVID-19 crisis has apparently made us pick up a bit of speed in this area, but we have to pick up the pace, and we have to continue with it even beyond the time when the crisis subsides. We, of course, commend the many companies who have invested in this space, and we call on the central bank, and we call on the government to continue to drive innovation. This will make it easier to do business in the Bahamas. This will create more business opportunities in the Bahamas. It will allow more people to have ownership in the economy with multiple streams of investment. We therefore support the expansion of the banking industry to include more Bahamian-owned and regional banks. It would ideally be good to see Bahamian and regional players as the buyers of bank portfolios that become available in the Bahamas for domestic and international banks as well. We have successfully transitioned the insurance sector, as you well know, to make it almost fully Bahamian-owned. We can aspire to do likewise in banking, and we must encourage our young professionals to aspire to become owners in banking and financial services generally. What we often do as a country and regionally is to operate in silos when there is no need to do so. We do have some common cultures across the region, and often our heritage and family ties intertwine, and sometimes banding more closely together in this country with regional players will perhaps shield us sometimes from some of the shocks and foster even greater regional commerce. Modernization, digitization, and regulatory facilitation would get us there even more quickly. As I conclude, I reflect on troubling conversations I have with business owners. And we hope that future bills will be designed to help to resolve some of these vexing banking issues, I would call them. It is still too difficult to open an account in the Bahamas. Easy, I am told, to open an account in Florida as a stranger than to open an account here on Bay Street. They're still too slow of processing of wire transfers, as basic as the processing of wire transfers. And I understand that some banks are now initiating wire transfers in Trinidad rather than initiating them in their home branches. Thirdly, the level of banking fees and charges sometimes appear excessive. Fourthly, KYC requirements, I mentioned before, are sometimes more onerous than the law requires. 5, it's generally very difficult to do banking business in the Bahamas. And it's even difficult for established businesses to do banking in the Bahamas. 6, the lack of flexibility, the lack of authority in making the business decisions. Low appetite, often for low appetites, I mentioned, for business loans, and difficulty generally in engaging with persons of authority in banks for established businesses. And 7, in relation to individuals, after they've paid off their mortgages, they often find it incredibly difficult to get their documents back from the bank. These are only some of the vexing issues faced by the business and individuals in our country. We therefore hope that the next compendium of bills addressing these issues will have more teeth to address more of the consumer-related issues. In the meantime, no doubt the governor and the government will use moral suasion, will work proactively with the highest level of management of banks to ensure that there are more positive outcomes. We support the bill. I am grateful for the opportunity always to speak on behalf of the people of Exuma and Ragged Island, and I wish Bahamians everywhere a happy 47th Independence celebration. May God continue to bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many, Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Centerville.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, the independent members, you know, we don't have as much resources as the government and opposition to provide a team to assist us with reviewing these many bills that are brought to the Parliament. You know, they say politics is about perception, and maybe that's why it's not one of my favorite sports. But we need to focus, Mr. Speaker, on substance over form. The lead bill, Mr. Speaker, today is the Central Bank of the Bahamas Bill 2020, along with the Banks and Trust Companies Regulation Bill 2020 and the Protection of Depositors Amendment Bill 2020. Centerville appreciates the industry consultation as well as the benchmarking that was noted. I will be brief today, Mr. Speaker, as I would have received notice of this item being agended this morning. And will do my best to represent Centerville under those circumstances. I want to recognize and encourage all of the persons who would have participated in the preparation of these bills, and also encourage our public servants who worked very hard on these bills. Centerville has no particular concerns with the secondary bills. That's the Bank and Trust Companies Regulation Bill or the Protection of the Depositors Bill. However, we do note for reference that the Protection of Depositors Bill requires an audited financial statement to be laid before the House of Assembly. Mr. Speaker, today the theme for my presentation will be governance money cannot buy. That is the theme for my presentation today, Mr. Speaker. Governance money cannot buy, by Sharon Turner. I rise today on behalf of the wonderful people of the independent Centerville constituency. Firstly, let me give the Centerville Thumbs Up Award to Mrs. Sharon Turner, a journalist, for an article one may find in the Nassau Guardian, June 29, 2020, last week. It speaks to...
Honorable member.
Yeah.
Are you adopting?
I am. Governance.
Just give the date and the source.
The date is Monday, June 29, 2020. Perspective, the Nassau Guardian. Governance money can't buy. Mr. Speaker, and honor. Oh boy. Mr. Speaker and honorable members, we need governance. Money cannot buy. In her words, you don't need to write a check to show respect. Mr. Speaker, I want to adopt the entire article to this House. In particular, some words of this journalist, Sharon Turner, and I quote, "Paying that largely looming debt is not as much a money problem as it is a problem of a respect deficit, because respect for the Bahamian people instrumentally will enable a quality of governance that money cannot buy." So good afternoon again. Good afternoon to the independent member of Parliament for Golden Isles, and to all independent Bahamians, and to an independent Bahamas during this our 47th anniversary. What a moment in time. An independent Centerville, an independent Roll Avenue, Farm Road, Culmusville, an independent Valley. I thank you all for this opportunity. I beg leave, Mr. Speaker, to address the Moody downgrade. Time and time again, I have said in this House that they are on to us. We cannot pass laws to get what we need and do nothing to follow up, or no quality assurance program to ensure that we do what we are supposed to do. Then I couldn't help but see the headlines last week where the honorable competent authority said that we should follow the rules. But for 3 years, I was asking for the rules to be followed, even in here, yet nothing. This Wednesday is the second Wednesday of the month, and it's question and answers Wednesday. Let's see which rules will be followed. Like Pierre Depuch. like Pierre Depuch would have said last week on the paradigm shift with Michelle Malcolm, that party politics teaches you how to ignore members who do not go with the party line. But Mr. Speaker, the Bahamian people seek and need governance that money cannot buy. Former Member of Parliament Pierre Depuch went on to say that he will no longer be voting for a party. He will vote for an individual. A profound statement, Mr. Speaker, coming from someone who has been around the political bloc. I do believe the Bank and Trust Regulatory Bill and the Protection Bill, like I've said earlier, with sufficient or had sufficient consultation with regards to its framework and its governance. I have already congratulated those who were involved. The lead bill, however, Mr. Speaker, I will address separately and on its own. It's the central bank bill. The focus here, Mr. Speaker, was on governance, the governance structure, the central bank governance model. It's usually one, Mr. Speaker, that we all duplicate to ensure that we have adequate corporate governance. We therefore depend on them to model. Governance, Mr. Speaker, is about order. It's about institutional development through discipline. That's why, Mr. Speaker, conventions, political conventions are important, especially in partisan politics. They speak to the core values of the institution, which then speaks to convention values and principles, and what the organization believes or doesn't believe. Mr. Speaker, it's about governance. These values, Mr. Speaker, and principles that are set through your convention and your corporate governance and institutional structure are then trickled down into the community, and they become a part of the culture of our people, the good and the bad. So when we talk about crime, Mr. Speaker, and we talk about health care, we must start with the highest institution of the law and order outside of the Spirit of God. So when governance breaks down even in here, it breaks down out there. We want the House, Mr. Speaker, but we do not want to build. Let's look at the central bank bill brought to the House. The entire corporate governance structure of this bill has been remodeled outside of a manifesto. And the government ministry to the people. It once again, to me, Mr. Speaker, lacks accountability and it lacks transparency. And that is in my opinion. It seems as if we now have more committees. It seems as if no one wants to take responsibility for their work, which means in the previous act, which we have repealed, the board and the bank had a reporting responsibility to this House of Assembly. In this new act, there's no reporting responsibility to this House of Assembly. Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask that in terms of references for these committees, they should be tabled in this House of Assembly, because even these committees have no reporting function. A reporting function, Mr. Speaker, is important not only to the deepening of democracy, but to transparency and accountability. Mr. Speaker, I hope that in the annual report that will be produced by the bank, that they will have separate committee reports, especially that we are including the dormant account as well as a monetary policy committee within their reporting framework. Mr. Speaker, the central bank has a statutory board in existence at this time. So I would assume that the existing board will end at the time that this new bill becomes enacted. Even from the existing board, with all of the changes, with all of the initiatives that were expressed through the central bank, we have seen no report coming from the board level with regard to their participation in these special initiatives. Mr. Speaker, the Dormant Account Program or the Dormant Account Committee, or now we have, well, we do have an investment committee, and now we have a Dormant Account Investment Committee. It is my opinion, and I'm just not, I don't know why the financial secretary needs to be on the Dormant Investment Account Committee. I just don't see where that is relevant. Also, the Dormant Account Program seems only to speak to the dormant funds, but there was millions of dollars worth of securities that this act or this bill does not speak to. So where are they going to be transferred to? We see that the dormant account funds are being transferred to the treasurer, but what about the securities, the investments, I can't remember the exact number, but it was in the tens of millions of dollars in securities. Where did they go? So, Mr. Speaker, they're just when we talk about governance structure and you're talking about ensuring that our country is in a position to sustain itself or a position of continuity, I think we need to pay special attention to how corporate bodies, especially where government is involved and of course politics is involved, where corporate bodies are transferring or communicating or being directed in terms of how they report the information received. Mr. Speaker,
The chair recognizes honorable member for Sanans.
Clause 35 of the bill, which does require the accounts to be tabled in this House. Maybe you might want to address that. I think he made the point that it's not required. Central Bank, which is what he was talking about.
Okay, which report? No, that's Mr. Speaker, I will you see?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, I didn't, thank you very much, Sedan. When I speak to the tabling of reports, and we look at the committee reports, and like I would have indicated earlier, and I do respect the position of finance, I will take a look at that section. I'm saying that none of these committee reports are being required to be tabled in the House of Assembly. And what this bill brings, what this bill put forward is that we now have 5 committees. And so I'm asked, what I'm saying is, and if it's just the bank report that you're referring to, then that is a part of it as well. So what if they put all of it in committee reports along with the annual report, and if they are there, then basically I will look at it and then we will go from there. As far as I'm concerned, I don't see the reporting requirement at the House of Assembly.
Honorable member, look at 35(2), subsection 8.
And statement of accounts together with external audits report be laid before the House. Okay. Just a point of clarification, because I guess I'm speaking to specific reports. This is just the minister would lay report. I'm speaking to investment, the committee report, as well as the bank report. So if it is that that's included in this statement and it's just not as specific, then I will accept that. Okay?
The chair recognizes honorable member for Sanans.
One of the functions of the central bank is to exercise its authority with a degree of autonomy. In regular corporate governance, subcommittee reports of companies tend to go up to the board as an internal mechanism system. So I think it would be unreasonable to have those reports. And that's not what it is. You can then get, for sake of a consolidated report or whatever. But the whole idea of the central bank is to have a degree of autonomy so that they can deal with monetary policy and bank regulation and so on and so forth, independent of being dominated by the central government. So I think the reporting requirement in 35 is what is normal under circumstances of government corporation. So I'd invite the member to look at that.
Okay, thank you very much, Zaidan. And I appreciate your comments. However, when we usually, Mr. Speaker, with the annual general meetings that we have, and in most corporations that I know of, right? Specifically, I know with annual general meetings with credit unions and major organizations, all committee reports are a part of the financial statement and annual report that's presented to the AGM. And so all I am saying is, could these reports be a part of that annual report?
The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Because I think it would be unfair to say that the central bank does not report on the various committees and actions of those committees. It is true probably to say that the bank will not publish the details of each committee's work. But if you go to the central bank's annual report, it speaks to the governance of the bank and all of the material matters that would have been discussed in all of its committees, which forms a part of the overall governance. The committees of the board are that. They're committees of the board, and the board reports. And so I would encourage the member, I get the point that he's trying to make, but I think if he goes to the central bank annual report, most of what he's asking for, if not all of what he's asking for, is contained in the report, in the annual report, as is required by the law.
Thank you, Honorable.
Thank you very much, East Grand Bahama. I guess, and I can appreciate what you're saying about the annual report. I guess what I'd like to see is more of an extension of this information being tabled in the House of Assembly for matters further. And so, yes, I understand that they are inclusive or may be inclusive in terms of the way it's presented. However, what I'd like to see is a tabling, since we have now expanded the governance program, including a dormant account investment committee, as well as a monetary policy committee. I'd like to see those reports being tabled, since they include a little bit more in terms of where the people's money is. So, Mr. Speaker, once again, I'd just like to thank the member for St. Anne's and, of course, the member for East Grand Bahama for their input in terms of the central bank and their governance structure and, of course, the reporting requirements as such. I just think that's important for us to recognize, and that's important for the Bahamian people to understand how how governance works. So what I'm saying today, Mr. Speaker, is that if we're going to speak to governance, right? And like I said, central bank is one of the models that we usually reflect on when we're looking at how to do things. And when I looked at the bill, it seems to be not enough transparent of a governance structure I would like to see. Now, if it's going to be run the way it's done here with 5 committees and 6 new board members, then I think we need to look at having more reporting requirements, and that's basically what Centerville is saying. And so I could appreciate where they were at with the last legislation. I'm just trying to see how this new framework, this new governance framework is going to advance us, especially with so much political integration. But moving forward, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure with the talented people that we have at the central bank and of course in the financial services industry, I'm sure they would be able to, they can appreciate where Centerville is coming from. You know, I just would like to, I want more public servants and more people in these sorts of positions to ensure they don't let the politics get too involved in the way they, and I think they need to help these politicians to understand their business so that we don't get in a,
The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
To help the member for Centerville to recognize again that the Central Bank of Bahamas is independent of the government. While there are consultations with the minister regularly on policy, particularly as it relates to fiscal policy, that does not give the minister or the government authority to dictate or to control the central bank. Obviously, we try to coordinate monetary and fiscal policy so that there is no disruption and there is a coordination in the approach to the fiscal affairs of the country. But it would be very, very misleading to suggest in any way that the government has any political or management oversight right of the central bank. Yes, the government does appoint directors, but it does not control the activities and direction of the central bank. Again, Mr. Speaker, I would want to encourage the member to maybe refresh his memory with respect to the central bank's annual report, which is very clear and very detailed in terms of the activities of the bank, as well as the status of various projects and issues that the bank may have addressed or is addressing. And again, just a cursory review of the report, I think will bring tremendous clarity to the concerns that the member may have. But I just think it's important to again state that the government does not interfere with the governance of the central bank. That is the remit of the governor of the central bank and its board.
Thank you, honorable member. Honorable member for Centerville, we save your 2 minutes.
okay, great.
Should you require them?
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. You know, for me, Mr. Speaker, when you start talking about a $1 billion drawdown on our country's reserves from the central bank, that's a concern for me. And so the reason why I'm asking and why I think we need to be a little bit more engaged in the central bank / governance / politics relationship is because we cannot be talking about $1 billion reserve, a drawdown of our country's reserve, and we don't understand the governance. Okay? Yes, I do appreciate.
Chair recognize the honorable member for East Grand Bahama on the point of order.
The member refers to a $1 billion drawdown of central bank reserves. Mr. Speaker, unless the member has some information that he wishes to share with us, I'm certainly not aware of any $1 billion drawdown on the central bank reserves. I don't think that's, I'm not going to speak for anybody, but if the member is suggesting that in the current economic environment, that it is possible that we can see a reduction in the external reserve from the current $2 billion or so mark that we have, down to roughly 1.2, 1.5 billion at the end of the fiscal year, which we've kind of indicated in our modeling is possible if the tourism industry, big if, the tourism industry does not perform. There is no drawdown, intentional drawdown on the foreign reserve, and so again, I don't know if that's kind of what I'm speaking to.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to belabor the issue, right? But here's an article from the Guardian where it says PM says foreign reserves will decline by 1 billion.
Honorable member, can you cite again? You're adopting?
Yes.
Can you cite the date? Give the date and
it's the Nassau Guardian, April 20th.
April 20th.
April 20th, 2020. The Bahamas foreign reserve will decline by 1 billion this year. Well, will or will, whatever, however you interpret will. So basically what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, is whenever this is in the public domain, right, that $1 billion of the country's reserves, external reserves of the central bank, whether it is possible that it will be drawn down, estimated, drawn down, however they interpret it. This is a concern. And so what I'm saying to the House is that we ought to be concerned about the governance structure when we are looking at that amount of money being whatever we intend or whatever they intend to use it for. So, Mr. Speaker, like I said, I don't want to...
Honorable member, the chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama on a point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ordinarily I'd let this go, but the member senator is a financial professional, and so I know he knows what he's saying. And the reality is that it would be very misleading to suggest that the government is somehow drawing down on the foreign exchange reserve. That is simply not the case. In the ordinary course of trade, with more foreign exchange being expended for goods and services that are being imported into the country, than the foreign exchange that we are earning, particularly from our traditional source of foreign exchange earning, the tourism sector, that there could be a runoff of the foreign exchange reserve towards the end of the fiscal year. That is not a government-led event or initiative, or to the extent that we can slow it, obviously we will try to slow it without causing harm to the economy. But I just want to make sure that the impression is not going out there that the government somehow is causing or is utilizing these foreign exchange reserves in some manner. It is the normal course of consumption imports into the country being more than the normal revenue or receipt of foreign currency into the country that causes a deficit in foreign currency that is deposited with the bank. It's a normal occurrence. And just for final point on that, it is also important to let the Bahamian people know and investors know that there is no challenge to our foreign exchange reserve at this time. We do not anticipate having that kind of a challenge based upon interventions that the central bank is taking to ensure that the statutory reserves are maintained, as well as fiscal policy that the government is also engaging in, financing policy the government is also engaging in to make sure that we, at all costs, secure the reserves, which is the basis for our one-to-one parity with the United States dollar.
Thank you very much, Eastern Minister. Thanks for your comment. And, you know, I could appreciate that explanation. You know, we just, you know, as the people, I think that is what we need. We just need a little bit more clarification on these matters as we keep hearing these big numbers and the COVID-19 and the 1.3 billion and this, that, and the next. I think it's important that the people understand what do you mean by, and again, like I said, the competent authority is who would have said about this drawdown. But let's just move on from there, Mr. Speaker. And, in all respect, I think that the compendium of bills are, like I said, the protection, the depositor protection, and the bank and trust. I saw them as a given in terms of what the country needs in terms of progress. However, I still think the central bank bill relating it primarily to the involvement where the politics can be a little bit heavy. I still have I have some concerns with that. But other than that, Mr. Speaker, we move on from there and we move forward. 47 years of independence. And I just encourage the Bahamians, to think independently. You're right. You don't have to be tied to you don't got to be tied to no party to find value in who you are and who we are as a people. So on that note, Mr. Speaker, I want to say thank you. I want to say God bless the Bahamas. God bless all of our people. And God bless this wonderful country of ours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many, Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Angleston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the incredible, stalwart, powerful people of Angleston who this morning were out in goodly numbers on Parliament Street when they feared that their voice and their members, their representative, it's not about me. I represent a people with a significant history in this country, long before me. The great Sir Clifford Darling, one of our heroes in this nation, was the first representative. And so there is a history of this people. In fact, in the last general elections, they held the fort for the Progressive Liberal Party when all else fell in New Providence. And I believe they will be a symbol and a beacon as we move forward in the general elections as to what will happen in that election. But I want to thank them for coming out and for calling me and encouraging me and admonishing me what I must do. And I want to say that they, like myself, were quite shocked, Mr. Speaker, at the amount of police officers in the square, across the road, on Parliament Street, with huge guns, huge guns. I saw the deputy commissioner of police, a woman, at the door of this Parliament. No, but on what, it makes you wonder about the manipulation of the instruments of state for political objectives. Anyway, we are where we are. People of Angleston were not intimidated because they were there. And when we walked through, they showed their extreme warm love and support for us in this Parliament. And in the democracy, Mr. Speaker, the opposition is a constitutional position, the leader of the opposition, because our Constitution anticipates not a one-party state, not a dictatorship, not a bully pulpit of a majority, but it protects and secures the voice of the opposition. And the way politics is, Mr. Speaker, Today, the opposition, tomorrow, the government. He's saying that quite a few times in the last couple of elections. So the leader of the opposition is not someone who someone wants to be nice to when they feel like it. It is someone who has a constitutional role in our democracy. And speaking about democracy, people of Angliston have a voice in this parliament. People of Angliston came out to support their member of parliament, and there were scores, someone said as much as 200 police officers. I don't know. But the numbers were incredible. I know you say stretch it, but people were shocked. They were shocked at the amount of police officers and the big guns. The big guns. Can you imagine this, Mr. Speaker? The big guns. Oh, the guns were very big.
Chair recognizes the honorable member for Mount Moriah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I felt obligated this morning just to address this briefly. The member and I had a conversation just before the commencement of Parliament this morning. I would like to say and put on record, Mr. Speaker, that the presence of the police officers here this morning had nothing to do with the minister with responsibility for national security, had nothing to do with this government. The Commissioner of Police has operational responsibility for the Royal Bahamas Police Force. And this minister and this government will not take it upon themselves to dictate to the Royal Bahamas Police Force how it ought to execute its duties within this country. And in closing, as I said before, on what basis the commissioner and his executive team decided that they need a presence out here this morning, that's on them. Okay? As you would see, that as they moved on into the morning, they amended and made changes where necessary. That's normal. That's normal policing anywhere the world over. But to suggest, and there was a report out on social media already, someone who don't have time for, who just have a lot of time on his hands. Okay? But to suggest that this minister or this government directed the police to do such a thing is erroneous and misplaced. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I was shocked to see the number of police officers and heavily armed police officers in the precincts of this parliament. The parliament, where elected officials come to speak and to represent the people who've elected them. And Mr. Speaker, the numbers and the type of weaponry that I saw with my own two eyes, because it was said I would not be, not me, that Angliston would not have a voice in this parliament. Mr. Speaker, I'm humbly asking that you lay the document that you read from, which I think you called it the dark list, where it includes blackguard, liar, rat, and there was some other word you said. I'm asking that you lay that in this parliament. And I want to, because I'd like to see that, see the list that you read out. And as indicated, I was seated, not on my feet.
Honorable member, just to correct you before you go any further, I can get a copy and table it for
Yes,
you,
I'd appreciate
but I wasn't reading anything.
Okay, thank you.
I wasn't reading anything.
All right, well,
I was
whatever you read.
speaking from my knowledge.
Okay, with your knowledge, I would be grateful, Mr. Speaker, if you would evidence your knowledge or evidence the supporting doctrine with your knowledge that you spoke off the cuff on, because I think the Parliament should see it. Mr. Speaker, on that point, the member for East Grand Bahama, in most indignant form, stood up and said, what he said, that don't call me garbage, and etc. And what I was indicating, Mr. Speaker, was that I was saying to him that when you use that language, it was not appropriate. The member told me that it was not unparliamentary. So I said, it's not unparliamentary. Junk is not unparliamentary. I said, suppose I call you garbage. So suppose we called your garbage, junk, garbage, etc. No, I'm not using.
Honorable member, are you on a point of order?
What's the point of
Chair
order?
recognizes the honorable member
I didn't have.
No time.
for East Grand Bahama.
At no time did the member for East Grand Bahama call the member for Engliston junk, garbage, or anything of that nature. If I remember correctly, and she should refer to it, the comment that she is taking offense to is something called, that I said, the junk bond crew. I never mentioned the member for Engliston. Further, Mr.
But I
Speaker,
never called.
the record would reflect that those words were either withdrawn or expunged, if I remember correctly, Mr. Speaker. And so the fact that the member from her seat or from her feet refers to the member for East Grand Bahama as junk or garbage, I'm going to respond to that, Mr. Speaker. Because she's talking about the people from East Grand Bahama that I represent.
For Angleston.
And there's no parliament in the world, Mr. Speaker, that you can refer to a quote unquote honorable member in the precincts of Parliament in such a derogatory manner. Yeah, I can call people names too, but I wouldn't do that to her. I would not do that to the member. It's not right.
Thank you, Honorable. Thank you, Honorable. Honorable member.
May I finish?
Honorable member.
You brought it up.
Yes, I'm speaking.
Do you recognize the role of the chair?
Oh, Jesus, the Lord of mercy.
Because if you do, you wouldn't be asking those questions.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, you're right.
I tried to
You're right.
control the debate.
Yes.
I tried to prevent interventions, but when a member rises on a point of order,
Yeah, he has a long rope. I can't speak. If I just open my mouth, what's your point of order? From you. It doesn't matter, Mr. Speaker.
see what you're doing.
Yes,
yeah?
because it is not even-handed what happens in this Parliament.
Honorable member,
It's
I'll
not.
just say this, and then you can move on. Just only a few days ago, I permitted you to speak twice during member statements. You asked and you requested, and the chair acceded and allowed you to speak twice. The rules specifically say you should only speak once, but I allowed you to speak twice. So, but okay. So don't give the impression that I'm trying to just silence you.
Because the member for East Grand Bahama is misrepresenting the exchange across the floor, and I'm not going to let him get away with it. I said to him, you are the one who said in this Parliament, I'm going to lay it. You are the one who called us on this side junk, the junk bond crew. And we call it that bunch, the junk bond crew. It was not withdrawn. It was reported in the media, and it was part of his speech, which he wrote down, considered it when he put it. What I said to the member, and I'm going to leave it at this, I said to him, you called us junk. He said, it's not unparliamentary. I said, well, is it appropriate? Suppose I called you garbage. You called us junk. And then the member took offense. No, I'm moving on, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to lay this. I'm going to lay it.
Honorable members.
Trust me.
Let me just make a ruling from the chair.
Yes.
With respect to the use of that particular phrase, garbage, junk, whatever, I'm expunging those words from the record. Whether they were used by the member by East Grand Bahama or the member for Angleston, those words are being expunged from the record.
I want to lay in the record of the Parliament because the member denied it at the time. Now he's modifying his statement. I would like to lay it on the table of Parliament that this member called us over here junk.
The chair recognizes.
And I remember, Speaker, because I
East Grand Bahama on a point of order. He's on a point of order.
Again, the member likes to create her own the member likes to create her own set of facts. And obviously she doesn't understand or let me take that back. Sometimes we say things in here and we don't hear what we said because it's said in some heat of the moment. I did not resile from the fact that I called them a junk bond crew. I said that. I do remember the member taking objection to it. We will look for we will get the parliamentary record to see what the ruling was of the House, because the House did make a ruling on that. I remember it. But that does not give the member the right, Mr. Speaker, regardless. Because I did not identify the member for Engliston as junk or garbage. And I would not do that to her because she represents the good people of Engliston who are valuable to this country. Every one of them, every man, boy, and child in this country. And for her, for the member for Engliston to make such a statement about East Grand Bahama is unbecoming. Unbecoming of a member. More importantly, unbecoming of a responsible citizen in this country. And a senior member of this House who knows better. It is unfortunate. It's unfortunate, it's embarrassing, Mr. Speaker. Embarrassing to this institution, not only the member.
The member for, and now the member has gotten very personal about me and who I am and what I am. So let me get personal with the member for.
Honorable member.
No, let me finish my Speaker. I can't speak.
You can speak.
Thank you.
Don't get personal.
Well, the member just got very personal with me. Well, it doesn't matter if it's me, Mr. Speaker. The member for East Grand Bahama is constantly in this parliament condescending to people and members in this House, many of whom.
Honorable member.
The Speaker's allowing this. I have never been allowed to do this. Mr. Speaker, may I finish my Speaker? I was. Mr. Speaker, may I finish my presentation? The member spoke for an hour.
Honorable member.
I would like to finish my contribution. No.
Honorable member.
No. I would like to finish my contribution.
Before we go any further, honorable members, I would like to refer you all to Rule 33, 16, 17, 18, and 19.
I got a right to make a contribution to this parliament. Something's wrong with this picture. Mr. Speaker, the member misrepresented what I said across the floor, and I will not allow him to misrepresent it. And I would like to lay on the table of the parliament.
Honorable member for Angleston.
Yes.
We are beyond the 1 o'clock hour. I'm recognizing the member for Bamboo Town to get an extension.
Beyond the 1 o'clock hour, Mr. Speaker, and we can do one or two things.
Can you resume, you see the member is making a motion for the extension.
Under the rules of this House, Mr. Speaker, we're not supposed to go beyond the 1 o'clock hour, beyond the 7 o'clock hour without a motion. And I'm saying now, Mr. Speaker, I am moving that this House do suspend until 3 p.m. today for lunch. Mr. Speaker, I do move.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend until the 3 p.m. hour. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose would stand. It is ordered that the business of this House stand suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.
All right. Something wrong with this picture. If I got